What a terrible week we've just experienced. How are we going to respond to it? Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concepts. My name is Shawn Whatley. And on this podcast, I don't normally talk about current events. Current events are no longer current by the time I get the video or the audio processed. But given what's happened this week, and especially with the assassination of Charlie Kirk last night, I couldn't not record something here today. So we're going to talk more about Charlie in just a second, but he came at the end of 3 terrible days. So yesterday, Russia's drones incurred into the Polish airspace. They had to scramble fighter jets. NATO's trying to figure out how it responds. Will this mark a bunch of more conflict in Europe right now? So it's a huge test for NATO. Israel bombed Yemen yesterday. We've seen violence in France all week since yet another prime minister stepped down after a vote of non-competence. That was on Monday. On Tuesday, we saw the Nepal government go up in flames, and not just a small fire, a massive fire engulfed in flames after protesters set it on fire for the government's shutting down social media. We saw video footage just this week of the 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee being stabbed while sitting quietly on a train in North Carolina. And the person who stabbed her was someone who already had 14 convictions and a long history of mental health illness. And then today is 9/11, the anniversary of the terrorist attacks. So a terrible, terrible 3 days. But the main reason I'm recording this is because of Charlie Kirk. So even if you've never heard of Charlie Kirk, you probably have seen the headlines now. Even if you go to the BBC website, they have 3 separate articles talking about Charlie Kirk. And basically all the media, the legacy media, reduces him to a political activist, a conservative activist, a right-wing activist, a Trump supporter. And they try to reduce Charlie to his politics. Even Canadian media outlets that I respect avoid mentioning his faith. But if you check out Charlie Kirk's social media, and I think a lot of people will, given what happened yesterday, the first thing you'll notice is that he was a ardent and open evangelical Christian, and he wore that on his sleeve. It was the first thing he wanted you to know about him. And there are multiple videos saying that, this is the most important thing in his life. This is what he wants people to know when they learn about Charlie Kirk or when they think about Charlie Kirk. And yet that's not coming through in the media. He was in politics because he was a Christian. Politics for him was a form of Christian apologetics. Apologetics is just the discipline or the approach to offering reasons for your faith. So he would offer reasons for his ideas within the political realm based upon, animated by, and ultimately founded on his Christianity. Charlie Kirk was 31. He had only been on the political scene for 13 years, and yet he rose to amazing prominence. I didn't follow him closely, but I was aware of him. It's hard not to be aware of him if you're following conservative politics in America especially. At first, I perhaps was a bit jealous of his ability. He was 18 years old when he showed up, and he was speaking with confidence and had arguments that I thought, well, okay, you're a young guy. You don't really have things worked out. But in a very short time, he was offering very sophisticated answers to difficult questions. He debated at the Oxford Student Club or Student Union and at Cambridge as well. And these were hostile crowds, professors and students who had planned for weeks how they would ask him difficult questions, and he had no idea what questions were coming at him. And that he offered with wisdom, intelligence, and just an overall decency to really nasty name-calling, ad hominem attacks. And what's more, if you look at his TikTok numbers, I believe he had over 8 million followers, and this was before he passed away. I'm sure that he'll have many more people following on him on his accounts on social media after his assassination. Over 4 million on YouTube. So his impact on a very large crowd of especially Gen Zers is massive. They look to him for answers, and not just answers about politics, but answers about life and marriage and what they should do with themselves and how they should handle difficult situations. Charlie Kirk's death impacted me in a way that I did not expect. Now, just to be clear, it wasn't the graphic nature of the videos that we saw on social media yesterday. My background is in medicine. I was actually a coroner in Ontario. You have to be a physician to be a coroner. And so I've seen many, many mangled bodies, far worse than anything we saw on social media yesterday. So it wasn't the graphic nature of what we saw that bothered me. What hit me was that here was an individual that was killed for speaking what he thought to be true, for standing up and being honest about what he thought, for giving reasons for the things that he held dear. That's why he was killed. That's why he was out in the public event with the students at the university in Utah. Being killed for what you believe in is, as far as I know, the definition of a martyr. For speaking out about what you believe in and experiencing the end of your life because of that work, that's a political assassination. I believe the governor of Utah said that. I agree. I've never seen that. At least personally, I've never seen that where someone is assassinated, executed, because of what they are telling the world, because of their message. And that had a profound impact on me. And mostly, the impact was one of sadness, yes. Just I couldn't even look at the videos of his wife and kids. I saw a few clips of his kids running up and him smiling and hugging them. Yes, those are devastating. Like, I have kids myself. I don't even want to think about them. That those were brutal, absolutely. And our prayers go out for the Kirk family for sure. But on an individual level, his death impacted me with a sense of cowardice. I have essentially spent the last more than 25, perhaps 30 years, perhaps ever since I entered university, hiding what I believe, pretending to think, giving the impression that I think or believe or support something other than I do. I think it was Ben Shapiro actually who said, if you want to get through university, you have to write your essays as though you're a communist. He said, it's not right. You are lying, but that's what you have to do to get your degree. The trouble with that approach, especially in a professional degree, so going through medicine, residency, you have to pretend for so long that it becomes part of who you are. You pretend that you're at least quietly in support of what's going on. And even if you disagree, you're going to keep very quiet about it. Or you might ask a question, well, perhaps is there another way to see this? Or I wonder whether this could be something else. Instead of saying, I hear what you're saying, and I fundamentally disagree. I want to have a debate with you. I want to have a discussion, but I fundamentally disagree with you. I do not believe that men can become women. Anyone with a prostate should not be allowed to compete in women's sports. So it's become okay to say that now, but when we were starting to talk about that, even just 2-3 years ago, it was a fearful thing to say. It was scary to speak out. I certainly was too scared to say it, at least that bluntly. I hedged around the edges and said, well, doctors are too scared to say anything. Doctors won't ask any questions. We just refer patients for whatever they want now. And this could lead to a path of harm. And I thought, oh, I'm being so courageous. That's not courage. We have all been bullied so much into silence that we aren't even aware of it. And we've been demonized by the left. We've been called Nazis and racists and misogynists and xenophobic. And these terms are not true. And even if they were true, like Josh Mitchell says, a philosopher in the States, he said, is that all you have? I'm way worse than that. Let me tell you about all my other intellectual and moral failures. I am far worse than anything you could throw at me. The left is brilliant at dehumanizing their enemies and mocking their enemies and coming up with new terms of abuse. And we've taken it for too long. A friend of mine on a chat group, she said, aren't we tired of being bullied? Isn't it time that we speak up? So Charlie Kirk's death, at least for me, I think marks a turning point. For me especially, but I think for all of society. I think we are going to see, I hope we are going to see more people standing up and being honest. Being honest about what we see and what we think. For example, this is a soft one. This isn't even, I don't think, very controversial, but it might get me in trouble. I think you can't be a Canadian. You can't be a member of Western civilization unless you know at least something about Shakespeare and the Bible. You can't expect to come to Canada and never know about Shakespeare and never know about the Bible and live your life in such a way that you refuse to learn anything about those two documents. I'm not saying you have to believe Shakespeare or you have to believe the Bible or believe what it says, but you need to know it. You need to know some of those stories. You need to know where that moral framework shows up within our laws and our system, in our representative democracy. You need to understand what Shakespeare's talking about, the tragic nature of human existence, about how the things that we try to do often fail, even though they started out with good intentions. How sometimes we lose our mind like King Lear and then we regain it later only to be filled with remorse, but a greater sense of wisdom. I mean, we would not be Canadians. We would not have Canada. We would not have the Anglosphere if it wasn't for Shakespeare and the Bible and many other documents. We need to stop saying that diversity is our strength. It is not our strength. It requires strength to allow a small degree of diversity. We can allow small amounts of other cultural approaches into Canada, but at some point, other cultures will overwhelm the mother culture in the first place. Now, the left wants that. Justin Trudeau wants that. He says we're a post-national state. His dad wanted the same thing. He wanted to weaken and dilute the English culture. My friends in Quebec say, what's the matter with you English people? He said, in Quebec, we fight for our culture. We fight for our French identity. You guys don't fight for anything. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying fight with violence. I'm saying fight using our words. The trouble is the left, again, has bullied us into silence. They say words are violence. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. Physical violence is not the same as saying something that you don't like or saying something that's offensive to you. And just to be clear, sometimes people will say things that are offensive to you and the people themselves will be offensive. That's not a reason to hate them or to call them Nazis or racists. Andy Crooks was on earlier, and he said, we need to have courage. He said, we might not have a well-articulated argument as to why something is wrong, but we just need to say, this is wrong. I don't know why it's wrong, but it's wrong, and I'm not going to stand for it. He was saying that with respect to the Indian land acknowledgements, indigenous land acknowledgements. He said, no one believes this. No one's going to give back their private property. And yet we all sit there and listen to these land acknowledgements. He says, no, I am going to stand up. These are racist. They're divisive. This is not building our country. And none of us believe that this is true, because if we did, we would take action and we would all give our land, our private property, back to the indigenous people. Doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. It's not based on history. It's a terrible idea. He says, I stand up in the meetings whenever this is said. More of us need to do that. We need to stand up. And if someone asks us why we're standing, we need to explain why we're standing to the best of our ability in a kind, compassionate way, a humble way. And if they tell us why we're wrong or how some of our facts and figures are wrong, we need to be humble enough to say, you know what, I don't have the whole picture on the situation, but I believe right now that what we're doing is fundamentally wrong. And we need to be willing to take the chance that we might be embarrassed by someone who knows more about the topic than we do. On this issue of taking action, we need to take action guided by virtue. So action guided by courage, honor, decency. We need to avoid action guided by rage. This is something the media loves to foment. They say, oh, the right is going to become violent and there's a radical right fringe. Yes, we know there are a tiny number of people on the right politically that are wedded to violence. They're anarchists. They want to burn things down. That is not a conservative sentiment. That is not about cherishing what we've inherited. That is not about building lives on the things that we've inherited and that we love. And I would say with confidence that the majority on the right denounce that kind of behavior. But let me be also clear that that kind of behavior, the incitement to action in the form of violence and burning and rage, blocking streets, having protests, throwing bricks, forcing businesses to put plywood on their windows so that they aren't vandalized, that's a feature of the left. That's a feature of the radical sentiment, the revolutionary sentiment. And the left does not denounce it. They quietly tolerate it and support it and send their funds to make it even more prevalent in society. So we need to stand up. We need to have courage. We need to say what we think is true. Liberalism and conservatism are not the same things. There's a liberal arrogance that still exists in Canada. This was popular in the 1950s in the States. Lionel Trilling captured it. He said there isn't even any kind of conservative philosophy. He said those conservatives are just reactionaries. He said they have, quote, irritable mental gestures which seek to resemble ideas, end quote. We're just a liberal country. The Hartz-Horowitz thesis, so Professor Horowitz, Canadian professor, argued that Canada is at root a liberal nation. That's it. It's just liberalism, top to bottom, front to back, from history, moving forward. We are liberal. There is no conservatism in us. Conservatism is about protecting the king and the papacy. Well, no, it's not. Maybe in Europe, but that's not the case in Canada. Conservatism has ideas of its own. It has ideas about what it means to be a human. Being a human isn't just all about free choice and agency. Sometimes our agency doesn't exist and we can't make choices. The liberal would say it's all about choice. Conservatives would say, yes, we want choice. And sometimes those choices need help. Sometimes choice fails. Sometimes we're so sick and scared and wounded that we aren't even able to make choices, like when you're bleeding on the side of the road. We could talk about the difference between knowledge. The conservative admits up front that much of what we know comes from people behind us. We inherit it. The liberal would say, no, we can figure things out on our own. And if you can't explain something to me that I can understand with my own perfect reason, then I'm not going to support it. It doesn't make sense. Conservative says, no, there are limits to reason. Like David Hume said, reason is everywhere, slave of the passions. Someone posted on X a quote by Soren Kierkegaard, the philosopher, that the tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. So our question for each of us, for myself and for you, is what are we going to do about Charlie Kirk's assassination? How will it affect us? How will it change the way we behave? Are we tired of being bullied? Are we going to start speaking up? If we all together start saying, no, you can't be in women's sports if you have a prostate. No, you can't be a Canadian unless you understand at least some of Shakespeare and the Bible. No, we aren't going to be living in a safetyism culture. It's like the archetype of a mother who wants to eat her children with protection and safetyism, hallway monitoring and reporting on our neighbors. Are we going to allow that culture to happen? Or are we going to stand up and say, no, enough? We will not support that. We disagree with that. I'm not saying to take violent action, but to say strongly with our words. Again, my friend Andy said it best. Are we going to simply stand up and show that we disagree with that? Even if it means a cost to ourselves. It's been a horrible week. Hope we don't experience one like this again for a long time. And I hope we don't let it go to waste. I hope it changes how we think and how we act. And I hope it gives us all a bit of courage to speak up and to push back against the nonsense. Thanks so much for taking time to listen to this. I'd love to hear what you think.